Dandavat pranams to all. We're continuing with our Upadeshamrita challenge. And thanks to those of you who wrote in saying that you were taking up the challenge. Jivana Didi, Jai Gauranga Prabhu, Braja Bihari Prabhu, and a few others that they were going to be following this journey. So we've reached verse number 2. And before we begin, I wanted to bring up one point which relates these, so 11 verses, right? And the first 2 verses, they're clearing the path, sweeping the dirt away. And then the next 9 verses, building the beautiful temple. And this is a theme that is consistent in the practice of pure devotion, in the teachings of pure devotion. That always doing the cleaning first, taking a shower first, and then putting on your beautiful party clothes. And we look at Lord Chaitanya Dev's Shikshashtakam prayers, Chaito Darpana Marjam. First, before he begins describing all the wonderful, beautiful, astonishing things that will come through the chanting of the holy name, first he says, clean the mirror of your hearts, clean the dirt away, clean the dust away. Then that beautiful, bright thing will come out, will shine from our own hearts. So it's an important point, because in the practice of devotion, there's always the risk that we mix up A for B, that we think what is material is spiritual, and vice versa. That we see our tendencies, patterns, habits, and we see them as spiritual things, and they're actually material things. So this is why there's always emphasis on purification first, and then what comes after that, is going to be the real thing. Now that doesn't mean that we're waiting to be perfect, right, before we begin practicing in earnest. Side by side, of course, there's that interim transition period, right, where both things are going on. But we're making a distinction. We're recognizing, okay, this is of the mundane nature. And maybe there's some higher touch also coming. I'm not exactly sure. I'm getting something that's inspiring me to go on. But I know I'm not in that purified stage yet. So what I'm getting, it's not the pure thing. I cannot fully rely on that. There needs to be some distinction. Otherwise, we'll be self-deluded. We'll mix things up. And another point too, putting ourselves aside, this approach emphasizes that this plane of bhakti, devotion, is far beyond anything of this mundane plane. That bhakti is not an emotional, sentimental thing. It's not anything pertaining to our senses, but it is of a transcendental nature. Bhakti, devotion, is of a divine nature, far beyond any touch of this material world. That is also a point to be considered. Okay, without further ado, so we are on verse number 2. Shamrita atyāhāraḥ, prayāsaś, prajalpo, niyamāgrahaḥ, jana-saṅgaś, laulyaṁ, ṣaḍbhir, bhaktir, vinaśyati. 6 qualities, 6 tendencies which will harm our practice of devotion, the development, the culture of our devotion. So the first here is atyāhāraḥ. Well, I'll read this translation too. Over-accumulation, over-endeavour, unnecessary talk, misapplication of rules, association with non-devotees, and fickleness. So atyāhāraḥ, this is the first point made here, which literally means eating too much, overeating. But in a broader sense, it means, as it says here, accumulating too much, collecting too much of anything, whatever it may be. Maybe food, can also be in a more subtle sphere, knowledge, anything at all, clothes, shoes, whatever it is, to have this tendency of hoarding, collecting, storing more than is required for our subsistence. It's a curious thing too, particular to the human species. Sometimes that analogy is given. If you put a bag of grain out, the birds and other animals will come and take what they need to fill their little bellies. But humans, they'll come and, fill up as much as they can to keep them going for the next few years. And this is why the world's actually, there's this imbalance, right? That some have some have, we hear about the 1%, right? Who own more than all the wealth of the world, rest of the world combined. So there's this tiny, tiny percentage who are living in ridiculous luxury, and then the rest of the world is in poverty. Because of that tendency to hoard, to store money, that's also included here. So that is something to be wary of. We need to remember anything in this world that we engage with unnecessarily for our own personal gain, there's a price tag on that. It's not free. Nothing's free in this world. So we may have that pleasure for some time, that enjoyment for some time that we have so much of whatever it is, but it is all reactionary. It will all come back on us. So we just engage, it's like we're kind of dealing with something a little dangerous, So we just engage with it as and when needed, as much as needed. Not more, not less. That's the safe way to deal with the material energy and all its resources. So atyāhāraḥ, collecting too much of anything. Prayāsaś. Now literally this prayāsaś, it means endeavoring. So the idea is endeavoring too much for an unnecessary end, whatever it may be. Nowadays we all get lost sometimes in a Google search, right? You go look up one thing, and before you know it, you spend 5 hours going off in every tangent, that popped up in your mind. You go out to the store to buy a packet of biscuits, and before you know it, you're at the other end of town because there's this really special brand and there's a discount at this shop, but that shop was closed, but then you heard there's another branch over here, and so your whole day's lost. You're trying to find this fancy pack of biscuits, and this is just in the worldly sense. This is a principle of like business or war. Like, know when to stop, know when to withdraw. Don't unnecessary waste of energy. This is very foolish, very ignorant. So we want to conserve our energy and use it as and when needed for something of purpose. We want to act with intention, with consciousness, not just get pulled along by the whims of our minds, but have some control over them and be able to stop when we see that is in our best interest. So atyāhāraḥ, prayāsaś, prajalpo, worldly talk, gossip, discussion of mundane, useless things. It is actually damaging to our faith. Because we know that there's one absolute truth, one spiritual truth, and we are pertaining to that. We are of that higher spiritual nature. And at present, we are living in a false version of reality, pertaining to temporary truths, temporary ideals, temporary values. So we do not want to invest our consciousness, in those things which are supporting, reinforcing this temporary version of reality. Of course, we don't completely neglect that. We cannot pretend to be on a higher platform than we are. We don't want to artificially, act in a way that is very unnatural to us. Pretend we're on some superior platform of consciousness. But we're trying to live a life of discipline, to some extent. We're trying to regulate ourselves in connection with higher ideals. We're keeping everything in perspective. It's not that our gurus, it's not like they hide in caves and they don't watch the news, they don't read newspapers. They know what's going on. Our guru, our param guru, they would keep up to date with everything that's going on, but they would do so with perspective, within the relativity of the whole. It's like if you enter a particular ecosystem, right, and you get fixated on one tiny little part of that ecosystem, and you start making plans in relation to this one little part of the ecosystem, but ignoring the nature of the whole. This is the problem with a lot of our, the energy that is used nowadays, or different resources that we exploit, right? We may exploit the Amazon rainforest for one particular end, but we're ignoring the consequences on the totality of that ecosystem, right? So it is the same idea. We are aware of world events, we're aware of what's going on, but we're seeing them with a different perspective, with a broader perspective, recognizing how they fit in, where they fit in within the totality of existence, of reality. So atyāhāraḥ, prayāsaś, prajalpo, niyamāgrahaḥ. Now this has a double meaning. Niyam means rules, regulations, and then agraha has a double meaning depending on whether you have a long A or a short A in the Sanskrit diacritics. One meaning to be over-eager in accepting and following rules and regulations, and the other side is to be overly neglectful, to be lazy in applying these things. There's one expression in the scriptures which is very relevant in this regard. Smartavya satatam vishnor vishmartavyana jatu chit eta vidi nisedasyor etayor eva kinkara. That all of the injunctions and the prohibitions given in the scriptures, they are servants of these two principles: to always remember and to never forget. To always remember the Lord and to never forget Him. So this is the real goal, this is the real end, to be absorbed in love for the divinity, to be absorbed in love for Sri Krishna, reality, the beautiful. And all the rules and regulations that are presented, they are for the purpose of supporting that higher goal. It's like, if we take the analogy of a talented musician, right? They have some natural talent, but in order to be able to fully express that in early stages, they need to go through some training. They need to go through some practice in order to support what's natural within. They need to follow some regulated practice. And then once they get to some standard level of training, then they're free. They can break all the rules. What is the real goal? To make beautiful music. So if you can make beautiful, there's no, what's right is what's beautiful, what's wrong is what is not beautiful, right? So if you can make beautiful music breaking the rules, then that's right. But in order to get to that stage, some prior training will be required. Some discipline will be required before. So it is the same thing in the field of spiritual practice. Because we're so much under the influence of the lower energy, we're fighting with our own selves, right? We are these confused entities. We're struggling between the higher and lower aspects of ourselves. There's the cry of the soul. There's also the cry of the mind, the senses, and so on. The cry of the ego, right? So we're struggling between all these different layers. So we need to follow some guidelines. We need to follow some discipline, so that we can, that call of the soul can become more refined, more apparent within us. We can learn to ignore those lower things, to detect what is what. So we need to learn not to feed into the lower self, to nourish that higher self and act according to that. So then some discipline will be required. And that's what the guidelines, the rules, regulations are there for. However, we have to remember that's not what they're about. That what we're doing, that the rules and regulations in and of themselves, they don't mean anything. And we need to recognize, understand what are the principles behind them, and know when to apply them, when not to apply them, when to modify them, when not to modify them. So then the other danger is that's mentioned here, is to be overly neglectful, to be lazy, to overly indulge our lower self, to be unrestrained in whatever comes from our mental system. There needs to be some check on that, on that lower energy, on the lower tendencies within ourselves. So to be too lazy in following the guidelines, or to be overly fixated on following them, both are unhelpful. That's not what it's about. It's about cultivation of love, ultimately. What supports love and what doesn't support love. That's what's really relevant here. So what's the next on our list? Atyāhāraḥ, prayāsaś, prajalpo. So over-collecting, over-endeavoring, worldly, mundane talks. Niyamāgrahaḥ, too much fixated on the rules, too lazy about following the rules. And jana-saṅgaś is the next one. It means worldly association. And this is something that may take place in different spheres. What it really means is identifying with worldly ideals, whether that's in the form of, persons who we hang out with, identifying with social causes, reading in the newspaper, television, movies, and so on. So it's not the activities in and of themselves which are the problem, but if we are investing our faith in these things, if we go out to the corner shop and we become best friends with the shopkeeper, talking about, whatever it may be, we are engaging with the world. We're not hiding away. But our faith is in the higher plane. Our faith is in the saints and the sadhus. Our faith is in the scripture, the shastra. Our faith is in these higher planes. So association really means, where we are investing our faith. We want an integrated Krishna consciousness. That's what I'm trying to say. We want a spirituality that's integrated with our environment, not an isolated spirituality, but one that's integrated with our environment, where we can navigate this environment in a healthy and a wholesome way within the relativity of a higher plane, higher ideals. And then lastly here, laulyaṁ. This is sometimes translated as greed. However, our gurus, Srila Sridhar Maharaj and Bhakti Saraswati, they've explained this means fickleness. That's another connotation here. Fickleness of mind. Something that we all experience. That our minds likes to jump around here, there, and everywhere. We go to the supermarket, and we go to buy a bag of potato chips. We spend 2 hours trying to decide which type of potato. Do we want those rich potato chips? Do we want an avocado oil? Do we want a coconut oil? Do we want baked? Do we want fried? Do we want, and then there's like so many different flavors, vinegar, salt and vinegar, and black pepper, chives and cheese. And, you literally, it'd be easy to spend more than an hour plus trying to decide which version, especially if you're in America. I just came from America. It's very difficult, not an easy thing, no easy task. So our mind loves this, because this is like playing on the nature of the mind. Our mind is really just like a tool, it's an instrument. It likes to get caught up like this. It's like, like there's that expression, speaking like a broken record. It's like the mind kind of like just gets stuck on a particular track. It's just the way it works. It's a tool. So with our consciousness in the background, we have to know when to be able to interrupt. Like, we want to utilize our minds, not be utilized by our mind. Udaret atmanatmanam, natmanam of Asadhya. This is in Bhagavad Gita. Make the mind your friend, not your enemy. The mind can be your best friend, or it can be your worst enemy. So we need to learn how to become the masters of our own mind, and not to be caught up in the various waves that our mind likes to go off on. We need to be the observer and the controller. We need to be the string puller of our mind. Okay, I'm going to stop there. I want to keep these as short and sweet as possible. So that's verse 2. Please tune in for the third verse coming soon. Thank you for joining. Jai Shri Gurudev.